So I'm going to walk us through some background information about how climate change has been happening and what we're seeing as a big part of the consequence of emissions coming from burning of fossil fuels, but also from deforestation and a lack of afforestation, or a lack of planting of trees, and how that's impacted us across the world to affect where we're at now, since really the start of the Industrial Revolution to now. So I'll start with this chart. This is information that's provided by the United States NASA research areas on tracking of historical data that goes back to ice core samples and looking at fossilized trees where they can still extract small molecules of air from the fossilized trees and see what the concentrations of carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere at that time. Maybe I should back up a little bit more. I know many of you are very knowledgeable about this stuff, but do we understand basically what carbon dioxide does in the atmosphere? Does anyone have a question about how it traps heat in the atmosphere? We're all good? That fundamental's easy? Okay. So what this data is showing us is that going back, as this shows, about almost 500,000 years is where they start here. Going back in time, we've seen the levels of carbon dioxide never exceed 300 parts per million in the atmosphere. With the advent of what has been an amazing thing for bringing people out of poverty and bringing prosperity to many parts of the world, the use of fossil fuels to burn and generate energy, but it's simultaneously having an unintended, very bad consequence. We've seen carbon dioxide levels go up in a spike at this level to where we are now at 411 parts per million. So before the Industrial Revolution, never before any data that we've seen looking all around the world, never above 300 parts per million. So we've increased it by a significant amount, 411 as of May of 2018. This data is provided by NOAA. It comes from the Mauna Loa Observatory on Hawaii, meant as one of the best places for us to just sample air movement and take good sampling of what CO2 levels have been. They've been doing it since just post-World War II, and they're seeing how much we've increased very steadily during that time. So that's part of the data evidence. Where has it been coming from? I've touched on this a bit already, and many of you are already very aware of this, but large portions, of course, coming because of the use of fossil fuels. Like I said, it has had a great good to bring prosperity, but it's had this unintended consequence. So gas in the form of natural gas, oil, and petroleum and all its byproducts, including the manufacture of plastics, coal, there as far as burning primarily for heat and for electrical generation, and deforestation. Part of why deforestation is in that mix is that when you're taking, most of deforestation that's been done in the last 150 years has been burning it. So they're not chopping it down and making it into wood planks. It's typically burned, and so thus released, all the carbon dioxide that's within the trees is being released into the atmosphere at that time as well. So that has been a bad part of that. Another one that's just a little blip on there, but lime calcination. So the manufacture of concrete is worthy of being looked at as far as a level. But for our purposes today in our United Nations model, we're going to be looking at the fossil fuel emissions and deforestation areas as the ones that we're going to try to address with representatives across the country to make things better. So has anyone tried to think what a pound or a ton, because it's always referenced this way, carbon dioxide we think of as pounds or tons. Have you ever thought of like what that would look like? Like how big is it? Like how much space does it take up? Well, some good people in Britain provided this graphic that I've been using now for years that shows a metric ton, which is about the same as an English unit or US version of a ton. But this is a ton of carbon dioxide in diameter. So about 2 double-decker buses high, and thus the same in width. It takes up that much space for 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Our cars typically discharge, if you have about a 30 mile per gallon vehicle, it discharges about 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So about 2.5 of those gets released from one car every year. Our homes are typically about the same as that as well, 2.5 to 3 tons, unless you've done things to make yourself much more efficient in your home. But a typical home in the United States is about the same as a car. When you're driving, a car is about 12,000 miles a year, and a home is meant to just be a typical American home. So additionally, data that many of you probably have heard about in the news, the temperatures across the globe have been getting warmer, and the hottest 10 years have all happened within the last 20 years, with the vast majority of them happening just within the last handful of years. So we keep seeing they monitor weather temperatures all across the world, and this data is then compiled, as you can imagine, to come up with this information. It's again NASA and NOAA working together as far as coming up with this information, but here's where we are. The last 3 years, we don't have 2018 data fully compiled yet, but it's like we're right there as far as the globe showing that we're doing more to hold in more of the sun's heat than we've done in the past. Now you may have a question. I mean, actually, there's climatological research. There we go. Paleoclimatological research, where they've looked back at the time of dinosaurs. Like you hear about those little things where they find like pieces of amber that still have air inside of them. CO2 levels at that time were higher than we have now. The Earth has seen higher parts per million than what we're seeing right now. But at that time, if your kids or you have looked at what we believe dinosaurs lived in, plants were like as big as 7-story buildings. And the animals were huge at that time too. It was like there was many fewer small animals. Everything was larger, everything was bigger. So it'd be a transformed world that comes with a change of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So I won't go too nerdy on that, but I'll give you guys just a little bit of background on that. So and what we're working on here today with you in the simulation is if we continue to release carbon dioxide emissions, as well as methane and nitrogen oxides, but we'll focus mostly on carbon dioxide. If we continue that path, we're going towards this, about an 8-degree temperature increase on the planet by 2100. We've only seen a 1.5, well, closer to 1, just barely over 1 degree increase in the last 100 years. And that's already factoring into what we're seeing with the dramatic changes in weather that many of us talk about and get to see little bits and pieces of. If we continue like this, there are children, obviously, that have been born just recently that will still be alive at that point and see a planet that's 8 degrees warmer than it was at pre-industrial times. So with those impacts, I'll hand it over to Anne because we see many things that happen to us health-wise and just in how we live our lives as those temperatures rise.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so as the global, as the average global temperature rises, so do the risks to human populations. And it depends, risks may vary depending on the extent of the temperature rise. So those risks include risks to unique and threatened systems. And so that would be like drinking water and agricultural crops, extreme weather events, widespread distribution of harmful human impacts, disruption to global economies, and other large-scale disruptions to life on this planet. Our goal as world leaders is to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius or less in order to lower the most cataclysmic, or lower the risk of the most cataclysmic consequences to human populations.
And I'll just point out,
Sure.
the 2 degrees is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Just so you can see that's what that scale is on the left.
2 degrees Celsius, exactly. So you can see that anything above that is going to be high risk for all populations. there we are with the green. Okay. Okay, so 4 degrees, if we fail to reach our goal, 4 degrees Celsius of warming, or 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit, would result in multi-meter sea level rise within 50 to 150 years, which would lead to mass migration globally. Widespread increase in the frequency of drought across the globe, exacerbating food insecurity. Intense and frequent heat waves, fires, and floods in areas, all areas. Okay. We would experience committed warming, which means centuries to millennia of gradually increasing global temperatures. That's because it's like a ball that's rolling. The momentum, even if we stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through burning fossil fuels, we would still see that temperature rise gradually. And long-term equilibrium sea level rise of more than or approximately 13 to 15 meters.
That's approximately 14, 15 even yards, if you think in those terms of sea level rise.
Yeah, it's huge. Irreversible changes resulting in global geopolitical destabilization. What would that look like? These are a few images. After 4 degrees Celsius of warming, London, and sea level rise. Millions of people displaced by widespread food insecurity due to droughts. And increased incident of wildfire, which we've experienced here in the United States a lot this year. So the more higher temperatures go, the more wildfires we have, which in and of itself puts more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Cool. Thank you. So that's really uplifting, right? What is good is that, taking you out of the UN model role, you as community leaders and communities of faith have greater influence to impact people at their heart. And that's part of what has to happen, is people have to feel a connectedness to other people and to other living beings, and then to all of creation, to say, this is really an amazing opportunity for us to stand up and help, not go hide. So what we need to be doing is looking at ways to reduce the amount of emissions coming in, because I like this analogy, even though it's cut off a little bit there, but basically we're filling the tub, because if you think about it, some of the most amazing things, I was born in 1968, so you know how old I am now, but I loved, as a kid, seeing the images from the astronauts of them going up through the atmosphere and then looking back at Earth, and images of that. And it always amazed me, looking at that, how quickly they got through the atmosphere. I said, yeah, it's only 10 miles. I mean, 10 miles is from here to North Denver. That's all the thickness there is of the atmosphere. Yes, it is encompassing the entire world, so there's a lot, but it's only 10 miles deep, is all it is. So if we keep, as we've been doing, filling the tub with parts of the atmosphere that, when it's in balance, it's not a pollutant, it's very much necessary, but as we put too much of it, it becomes a bad thing. Like the old adage that I always grew up with, too much of a good thing, too much of a good thing quickly becomes a bad thing, something like that. It's like, that's what this is. Carbon dioxide is a good thing. It's just too much of it has become bad. So we need to work at how we remove it, how we stop the increase and then work at removing it. So if global emission reductions of 80% by 2050 are continuing thereafter, and then also working on deforestation and afforestation, can stabilize these concentrations of greenhouse gases and slow the temperature increase and moderate sea level rise and other risks. To me, I have hope in this because I feel like the Spirit has said to us, if you work together, if you cooperate, you can solve this problem. This is not insurmountable. Nature wants to heal itself, and it's ready to do it. We just have to say, my heart is connected to that person, and to that person, and to the other people in other parts of the world to say, I'm going to do my part to make sure that this isn't a problem. With my daughter, who's 14, who might live to 2100, maybe, being like, okay, seeing an 8-degree temperature rise across the planet, and an entirely different way how we produce food and just live on the planet. No, we don't have, it doesn't have to be. But we're being challenged to act and do something about it. So, your goals. It's me and Ann stopping at this point with our most of our explanation. We'll walk through what we want you to put your beautiful minds and hopefully some guidance from the Spirit to help with, to say, what would you do in the role of being a leader in a certain part of the world with the ability to influence how things would be done to benefit, meet this challenge, basically. So our goal is to keep global warming, as Ann said, below 2 degrees C or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above the pre-industrial levels. So we're only going back to, I know for many of us the Civil War seems like it was a long time ago, but we're basically just going back to that. When I was born, there were still people alive that were Civil War veterans. So it's like, it's not been that long that we've been doing this harm, and it's not going to take a tremendous amount of time to fix it either, but we have to work at it together. So you guys agree on a deal to share the costs of mitigation and adopt funds to aid the most vulnerable nations. So in other words, developed nations of the world, we have financial resources. We use it for a lot of different things. The developing B sections of the world, the places we talk about, Iran and South America and Central America, they're usually just barely able to scrape things together to keep people hanging on in some cases, or just functioning at a much lower level. Some of our resources need to be shared with other parts of the world to help them meet this challenge. So think about it from that perspective. So with that, we will be bringing up some computer software in just a little bit that will be entering some data. Well, we had it as a slide early on. But on your form, this is where we want you to add your information so we can enter it into the computer simulation area so we could see what your plans lead to as far as a resulting drop in temperature, or are we still going up really high, or how it's working. So you get a sense of what it would take to meet this challenge on a big scale. So on the forms, yes, so the forms are on your table. So if you hand those out to each other.
Actually, each table just has
just one?
2 forms.
Okay.
So as a team, as a region, you will fill in one at the beginning after the first round of negotiations. And if we can do a second round of negotiations, you will fill the second one in.
Thank
Okay?
you, Ann. Please, jump in on that. So as you're looking at this, this is just some quick visuals for you. Like if we continue with business as usual, this would be the tons of carbon dioxide in terms of billions of tons of carbon dioxide per year, where we're at, where we continue going in our current state. If we stop the growth, like if we completely stop, growth, just stay static, flat level right now, stay static, there we go. That's where we could go, and we'd start to see things potentially decline because of how the Earth is going to heal itself and wants to heal itself. So if we also start reducing the amount, if we stay flat and then start reducing it over time, it would look like this, with a goal of an annual reduction of 1% per year, would bring us back to where we are basically in about a little above where we were in 2000. If we do 3% or 5%, we can see how we can get better than that and get to a place where we're doing some very aggressive healing on the planet. So basically we want to look at, in the case of what you're doing, the year of, the amount of global climate change emissions, in your region to stop growing in a given year. You want to look at that and then say, which year will you begin to have emissions fall? If you agree to have emissions fall, at what rate would you see the emissions fall at? So back to this. This is where you'd be entering some of the information as far as it's tough because it's right there. That's the peak year. Yep. So what the emissions were then going over to the emission reduction beginning year, and then the annual rate. So do we want to stop reducing, or we want emission reduction to begin in 2021, and then at a rate of 1%, 2%? That's what we're asking you to put your best guess at, and then we'll plug it in, and you'll see how that benefits the world based on the region that's doing that. Is this you or still me? Okay. So the second area of decision, like I said, getting away from emissions, is about deforestation and afforestation, as we've talked about. So this is another tool to help heal the planet. If you stop the removal of forests, great. That's going to be very helpful in the areas where we have forests still remaining. As I've said to other people before, a great deal of this country used to be forested, much more of it than it is, especially east of the Mississippi. So, there's still areas we protect, thank goodness, but in other parts of the world, they're still following our path of let's clear out trees, let's allow cattle to graze, and at the same time burning the trees and having resulting problems with that. So you can decide how much you want to try and stop deforestation, as well as how much you want to promote planting of new trees. So these, again, the tools like reduce emissions, stop cutting down of trees, plant more trees that we're asking you to take a peek at. So here you can plug in whether you want to do no reduction in tree removal, just continue with status quo, or maybe cut it by 25% or cut it by 50%. And then similarly on replanting of trees. Do we want to be no more trees planted, or do we want to be having that be as a means of job creation in many parts of the world? That money from the developing countries helps pay people areas to plant more trees and give them a real purpose to help the rest of us, with this cause. So anyway, but yeah.
And to clarify,
Yeah,
wherever
please.
you see BAU, it means business as usual. Okay, and I think we're coming to understand we cannot continue with business as usual. Okay, so the last decision that you and your group will need to make is pertains to the climate finance. Nations of the world have agreed to raise $100 billion per year for the climate fund. And you need to determine how much your region will contribute to this climate fund, or if your region needs to request funding from the climate fund, and how much it will need in order to reach your goals of reducing carbon dioxide emissions and reforesting. And then you would put that amount in that last space on your form. Okay, so after negotiations, each group will have the opportunity to briefly, and very briefly, 2 minutes, present their proposal to the entire delegation and explain the reasons for your decision. Please designate a representative from your group to give this brief 2-minute presentation. As each group presents their proposals, we will record them on the whiteboard here, and we'll also be plugging them into the C-ROADS program so we can actually see, as a delegation, what difference our proposals are making. You will have 10 minutes for negotiations, so you may want to spend the first few minutes formulating a strategy within your group, answering those questions on the form there. And then you might want to get up and start talking to each other groups, to determine what might be the best if you can reach the best possible outcome for the entire world. Okay, so it's up to you now. Good.
Is there time for a question?
Sure,
Oh, sure.
absolutely, yeah.
I had a question. One of your slides,
Okay, we
which
could back it up.
broke down where CO2 is coming from
Okay.
between the United, it's fairly early on,
Right.
between China, the United States, India, and the last one of them, that one.
This one?
That
Yep.
one, okay.
Other developing, is the blue line, or is that intended to be a
This is China.
compilation of all of the dark blue line?
Oh, the dark blue line is, yeah, other developing countries.
So that's all of the, that's everybody at these two tables.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
So-
not everybody, because China and
Except for
India,
China.
yeah, China and India
Right. India being
are
pink.
included in that. But all of these countries, US, EU, and other developed, are all represented by that one region over there. Yeah.
So it's mostly the folks at that table.
It's a
If you
big
look
portion
at-
of
if you
that,
look
you're
at
right.
the charts
Oh,
on
that's
the
really a
back part
good
of
point.
That's a very good observation, right.
Well,
Yeah.
of course, the United States.
Yeah.
I'm worried about other than the United States.
And folks may understand why that's happening, but why it's forecast that way is so many other parts of the world are saying, we want the lifestyle that people in the United
Right.
States have been having. So they're, in Europe, correct, yeah, and Japan, for 50 years now too. But so it's like in those areas of the world, they want that. And so if we rely on fossil fuels to get there for everybody else, this is what would happen, basically.
With
But-
information of,
Okay.
like a cost analysis of what our, kind of how our decisions go? Because obviously you can say, oh, we want the best, but.
Right? It's a very good question. Honestly, with the limited time we have, unfortunately, we can't give you more than what's like shared on the back of that
Yeah,
document.
on the briefing
right now,
statements
but
might help you.
but it's great. Lisa, honestly, this could be done in a 3-hour session, and then we could even dig deeper. So right now, it has to be a little bit of shooting from the hip with a little bit of information. But
Right.
you're right. You have to think. Well, we have $100 billion that was pledged at the Paris climate talks, which currently the United States is the only country that's not a part of. So we can all have a reaction to that. But anyway, but the rest of the world is saying they are going to contribute to get to that $100 billion to help the world do healing. So, yeah, there's no one specifically representing the United States today, so you don't get to throw stones at anybody, I guess. But
Okay, so we'll give you 10 minutes. Do you have another question real quick?
Yeah.
The fund.
Okay.
The green fund. So it's, was it 100 billion?
correct.
100 billion.
So there's going to be contributions, and then there's going to be some that may say they need money out of it.
Yes.
But the fund is really funding the money out of it. So if we say zero in, that would be,
Then we may not get to the 100 billion. That's part of what we'll see in the software, is if like the developing world says, oh, we're only going to do 50, and then if you and the other parts of the world say, we need money, we're not going to give any more, then we're not going to get to the target.
Right.
So there'd have to be negotiation to say, how are we going to get there? We're not getting there right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good luck, delegates. You have 10 minutes. We'll start with the developing.
You got 2 minutes to change the
developed
world, that's all.
Countries of the world, developed countries of the world. Do you have a spokesperson who can come up, present your proposal, your reasons for it? We only have 2 minutes to do that. And Betsy back there will be holding up a sign when you get to the 30-second mark and then when time's up. So, developed countries, who is your spokesperson?
I don't know.
Thank you. You're brave. That's good.
We wanted the emissions peak year to be 2020, with emissions reductions beginning in the year 2022, and the annual reduction rate being 4.5%. And then in terms of the deforestation, 80% cut on that. plus an afforestation, replanting trees at 80%, and giving an annual contribution of $7 billion.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. So Linda, we'll just have you say that again, so now it's 70.
It's 70 billion per
Okay.
year.
So 70 billion per year. My bad, I misinterpreted. So- Glad you guys all got it.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, developed countries. Developing A.
All right,
So developing A feels like emissions peak year should be 2030, that emissions reduction begin 2035, and 2% annual reduction. Deforestation, 10% reduction. Afforestation, 25%, 10 billion contribution.
fantastic. Okay,
I'm sorry, what was the contribution?
10 billion.
10 billion.
All right, Ken, come on over.
Okay.
We'll swing you around and keep you out of the being
Yeah,
blinded.
keep you out of, from being blinded. Hi, I'm speaking on behalf of the less developed countries of the world. And we realize that we are not a major contributor to the world's problem these days. However, we do govern most of the people who are suffering the most from these problems. And we understand that a lot of the people who we govern we can't stop their desire to improve where they are to a better life immediately. Consequently, we are looking at a peak year of emissions in 2030. We also realize that in that process of those people wanting to improve their lives, it's not going to be possible to stop that immediately in 2030. And so we don't think that our emissions reductions are going to begin until at least 20 years later in 2050. By the time we get there, given where we have started, we are willing to reduce annually by at least 1%. Probably the greatest thing we have to offer to the world to contribute to this is to do something about deforestation, since the vast majority of some of the most fertile forests and important forests in the world are in the countries we represent. So we would be willing to try to achieve a goal of 75% reduction of deforestation, and to make sure that as we move forward, we reach a afforestation goal of 50%. As for what we are able to contribute being the poorest countries of the world, we are going to need a great deal of help to achieve even these goals, and consequently, we will not be able to make any contributions toward the mitigation fund. Thank you.
Excellent, Ken, thank
Okay.
you.
Very good, thank you.
Ken's ready to be in the UN, I love it.
Okay, so I just want to double check with developing
Me
B
too.
countries. Do you not feel like you need to request money from the fund in order
Was
to
that
reach?
part of the question?
Yes, that's part of the question. Do
That
you
doesn't
want?
make sense, actually, because the fund gets funded and then you pull money out to the countries that need it.
That need it.
Exactly, so
But
I'm asking them if they need to pull out money from that fund.
Based on what I just said, of course.
And how much would you like to pull out of it? How much are you asking for?
50.
50 billion a year? Okay,
So I was assuming we were pulling money out of the 100. Could we get to 100? So we could definitely
You're right.
net pulling out money to our countries.
you feel like you could pull, you should, or you will need to pull out money.
Sure.
Okay, is it 10 billion, or that was
Well,
going
we
to be your?
thought we could put 10 billion in, and then some of our countries would get maybe 8, and another set might get 5, or whatever, out of the 100.
Okay, so how much do you think you would net? Needing to pull out more money?
So you need to make some of those positive and some of those.
I'm
negative.
sorry, yes, you're right. So that's pulling money out.
Ours
These
is
are
definitely
contributing.
negative.
Okay,
Well, I would say we'd be 30 billion pulling out.
pulling out, so 30 billion pulling out. There we go. Okay, let's see where we're at.
Yep, Selena's been keeping up. So with our goal, this was actually a pretty darn good first shot. The sweet spot is right there. So we're just a little bit high on that. Now, the dollar amounts, as you probably are hearing, to make it happen, I don't think are
Right.
equaling yet.
No,
But
we're needing
as far
more.
as what you're planning to do with emissions and afforestation and deforestation is really close. So now, and Ann, I'll turn it back to you to say how we'd want to proceed, but yeah. We want to work at it to see what we would do both in getting to this target as well as
Right.
seeing where money.
You can see
Might
that
be-
we're still at above 2 degrees Celsius.
Well, this is Fahrenheit now.
Oh, we got
Yeah,
it to
I
Fahrenheit.
put, so
Okay,
3.6
good.
degrees, so we're really close.
I see, we
So
really
yeah,
are then.
Yeah, so it's not bad. Yeah, I switched it to
Okay.
US
Okay, good.
units. Yeah.
Okay, so then I need to ask the group how you want to proceed. We have about 15 minutes, a little bit less than 15 minutes. We would like to spend some time debriefing all of this process. But do you want to take another maybe 5 minutes to negotiate with each other in your region, among your regions, to see if we can get it down to within that
The Goldilocks area we're
goal,
trying to be.
the goal, yes. And if you can negotiate this fund so that it comes out.
So it comes, I'm back to the fund.
Right.
It looks to me like it's kind of balanced, you know, it's 100.
Almost.
It's
Oh.
10 billion off, so what's?
10
but, it's close.
It's close, it's close. And I think the developing countries have been pretty generous. The developed countries have been pretty generous to fund what the developing countries need. It looks like. We're just 1 billion off, right, exactly. So, do you want to negotiate a little bit? Take 5 minutes?
Or do we want to debrief and hear more of like what you could do? Like,
Okay,
Okay.
let's do that.
okay.
All right.
Because you get the sense,
You get this.
if you were all representatives of the UN, well, the UN's done an amazing job. It's just our country right now is the one that's been not playing well with others. You know, it's like, anyway, but the rest of the world is. So,
Can you talk about sort of where that fits into reality?
Yeah, we have a slide for that, so we
Okay.
just need to put it back to the
yeah,
slideshow.
what did I do with the auto advance?
Here? Wait.
Thank you, Selena, for the help
Yes,
on that.
thank you. So that's the current picture of what was accomplished at the Paris Climate Accord.
They did 3.5 degrees centigrade, which is below where we
Right.
slightly.
Yeah, slightly below. We were at 4 approximately, or just 3.9 or somewhere in there.
No, 3.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to
Celsius.
do is convert it back to them for
Okay.
Celsius, because, well,
Yeah.
no, that's true. We were better than that, right? You're right.
Yeah, we were
3.6
way better
degrees
than
Fahrenheit.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were way better than that.
Yeah. The agreement still stands. It's just the funding. Right, that's what gets to be so tough is the funding part of it. It's like the rest of the world either has to pony up a lot more money, and we just continue to pollute and not help. But there's been lots of states and lots of companies that are stepping up saying, we're going to meet this. We're going to get money, is what I presume the plan is. I honestly don't know yet, the states that have committed to do it, but to get resources to help continue with it. I mean, part of it, I know they're trying to say we're curbing our emissions, you know, like what we're doing in this state, you know, currently to try and move towards zero emissions with utility, you know, electrical generation. But yeah, it doesn't help. It does not help that we're not saying we're a leader. We're saying, nope, we're not a leader.
I'm curious, so let's say we're giving 50 billion to a developing country. How is that money spent? How is it actually helping? So the money that we're donating, where does it go? How does it
Right.
manifest?
My understanding, and Ann, please chime in, and others can chime in, you know, I know large portions to the developing areas is to try and find ways to make the forests more profitable. whether that's doing more work to find pharmaceutical solutions that come out of rainforests, or to find sustainable means of harvesting and having that wood or those resources be something that would make money. And then also the planting of more trees, as far as paying toward that. That is my very rudimentary understanding. I'm sure there's more.
Yes,
to it than that.
I think it also goes to helping developing countries create the infrastructure that they need for renewable energy.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, in fact, I heard recently, and I don't know the statistics, but that China is trying to go all renewable energy by, I don't know, I was pretty surprised, but I think it's something like 2030. Yeah, because I was surprised that they were planning to move so quickly. But so I think that that the fund would also go to help develop that kind of infrastructure.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Part of
energy
our fund
infrastructure.
helps,
Yeah.
You know, companies from developed countries and near developed countries to share their technologies and work with the developing nations
Right.
to
Leapfrog,
build solar or
right.
whatever they-
Yep.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Do any of you know how, would the UN administer this? There's corrupt governments around, how, is
Yeah,
there,
I know.
is there a plan for, who in that developing country would get the money?
That's an excellent question.
Right.
I'll admit I
I
don't
think
know.
it's part of this. I think it's part of this last one here.
Okay.
Loopholes and cheating will be prevented, so I think they have to, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has to continue working on that piece. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the islands that get flooded and they have to move people? Is any
Right.
of that paid for in this?
Right. That's another excellent
Yeah.
question. I know it's
And
one
I
of the
don't
big
know.
problems, but I don't know if it's part of the funds for this as part of the solution set. But it's absolutely true. I mean, there's islands already where people are having to move. It's not in the future, it's
Right.
happening.
It's happening now.
Right. But yeah, I'll write down both of those good questions. Because I'd like to learn a little bit more about
I am moving us
that.
back to,
So one thing, yeah.
how do you, I would like for us to talk about this. How do you feel after
This quick
this
exercise.
very brief exercise?
Like,
I can answer that. Betrayed by my own government.
right,
That's how I feel.
right.
You're preaching to the choir with us in here.
I think
know.
so. I agree.
I don't know that the countries would all be so congenial.
Right.
Well, we might be the choir and say, like, this is great, like, I can't even fathom developed countries having peak admissions next
Right.
year. That's next year.
Yeah.
Right.
It can't even.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
it feels discouraging because, I think ours was so overly optimistic and we still didn't make the goal.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
insanely optimistic and we still fall short.
Yeah.
Fall short.
Well, but see it that, again, there are other, what would most likely happen if the developed world is really moving as we are doing, we are moving towards things and putting funding into this. If we help the Czech Republic or other places leapfrog, or help China leapfrog, as they're talking about leapfrogging, suddenly they then in a few years could say, oh, we're ready to be giving money, or 10 years from now, maybe we're ready to be giving money back to this instead of taking money out of it. And it may take a little bit longer, but still getting there is very, it's very viable. But I
Interestingly, I actually felt like the whole thing felt very hopeful. On the other end, where I was like, okay, if we were all sat here and then all those results, and we all thought we were giving a lot, and we would have been like, and you get absolutely nowhere. You would have been like, wow, that really sucked. But I mean, by the time we all sat here, and you guys needed money, we were generous, and you showed that we could get someplace with it. I mean, if the exercise showed, well, that's all really nice, and go pack your bags, we're all about to die, that would have been really sad. So
Right.
to me, honestly, it feels like it can be fixed. So that's where I come from it.
right.
And Anne, you talked about that fall ruling,
Yes.
moving it, and so then, even though it was only 4%, it was not the 2%, whatever, we were a little bit off, maybe that ball all would be rolling in the right direction in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of hopefulness too. I was lucky to have a picnic last summer with a British climatologist.
Ah,
And
okay.
we were all kind of gloom and doom too, and he goes, no, it's just a matter of the world getting together.
Right.
Yep.
It has
Right.
to be. So this was interesting to me that you put us all together and made us be the world. Because
Good.
if somehow, with the help of God, we can all get this going.
Exactly.
There is hope.
There is hope. Just getting back to, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. And Paul and I recently attended a presentation where the speaker was saying, hey, the whole world got together and eliminated polio, from as a health risk to people. We can get together and do this too. Address the challenges of climate change. So I think we have to look at exactly what Tracy was talking about this morning. What can we do as an individual? That's one thing that we're doing to contribute to solving this problem. Yeah.
And does anybody, with that note, there's great websites that Ann can bring up, and I can bring up an example of one, but there's great resources on like the things we can do, each and every one of us, around climate change. Would you like to see that quickly in the last minute or two here? Okay. So there's some website links. This is just a sample because there's many. But the BBC had a great one that I found recently. The Union of Concerned Scientists, USA, that's that one below. David Suzuki Foundation has some great ones. So if you want to snap a picture or jot those down.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming and for your interest and passion about this topic, and for all of the things that you're going to be doing to reduce your carbon footprint and reduce climate change. So thanks again.
You're welcome.